child stands on a battlefield. He's barely a teenager. Around him, soldiers are dying, screaming, bleeding. This child is fighting a war, fighting in one of the deadliest conflicts in history. He should be in school, should be playing with friends, should be living a normal childhood. Instead, he's fighting for his life, killing enemy soldiers, witnessing horrors no child should witness. World War II was filled with stories of child soldiers, children who fought, children who died. Some volunteered, some were forced, some were orphans with nowhere else to go. These children became combatants, became warriors, became part of history. Today, we're going to explore 15 untold stories of WWII's children combatants, 15 tales of youth thrown into war, 15 stories of children who had to grow up overnight, 15 accounts of the youngest fighters in the most brutal conflict ever. If you're interested in World War II, untold stories, children's experiences in war, and the human cost of conflict, subscribe to Surprising. Every week we explore fascinating historical narratives. We examine how ordinary people survived extraordinary circumstances. We discuss the personal stories behind history. We honor those who suffered through war. Subscribe now so you don't miss our next video on WWII, History and Human Experience. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And thanks for watching. These are the stories the history books rarely tell, the stories of the youngest warriors. Reason 15. Calvin Graham, the boy soldier of the Pacific. Calvin Graham was just 12 years old. 12. His childhood was already a nightmare. His father dead, his stepfather abusive. He spent his nights sleeping at friends' houses, running from his abusive home. During the day, he sold newspapers and watched the news from the war. The Americans were losing. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Hong Kong. One loss after another. Young Calvin decided he would join the fight, would become a soldier. At 12 years old, he forged his mother's signature, stole a notary stamp, tried to enlist. The recruiters almost turned him away, until Calvin threatened to report them for recruiting other underage soldiers he knew from school. He won. He got into the Navy. Calvin was sent to the USS South Dakota. At 12 years old, he was manning an anti-aircraft gun. At the Battle of Guadalcanal, his ship was hit 26 times in 4 minutes. Shrapnel knocked out his teeth, badly damaged his face, but young Calvin helped carry wounded sailors to safety. At 12 years old, he was awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, but then his mother found out. She complained to the Navy. He was thrown in the brig, dishonorably discharged, all his medals stripped. It took decades of legal battles to restore his honors. Reason 14. Jack Lucas, the 14-year-old Medal of Honor recipient. Jack Lucas was 14 years old, still in 8th grade mentally, but physically, he was tall and strong, 5 feet 8, 180 pounds. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Jack knew he had to fight. He forged his mother's signature. His stepfather actually drove him to the recruiter. The stepfather wanted to be rid of this troublesome boy. Jack got in. He was 14 years old in the Marines. At boot camp, he excelled. He was ahead of all the older recruits. His instructors wanted to keep him, made him a permanent instructor. But Jack wanted combat, wanted to fight. He sneaked onto a transport ship, became AWOL. On day 29, before he could be classified as a deserter, he turned himself in. He was assigned to the Marines heading to Iwo Jima. He turned 17 on the ship 5 days before the battle. On the beach at Iwo Jima, soldiers were dying all around him. Suddenly, grenades landed near his position. 2 Japanese grenades. Without hesitation, Jack threw himself on one, shoved it deep into the sand, grabbed the other and pulled it under his body. The first grenade exploded, sent Jack flying through the air. He landed broken, bleeding, his eye hanging out. 22 emergency surgeries saved his life. At 17, Jack was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Truman. Reason 13. Sergei Aleshkov, the 6-year-old soldier of Stalingrad. Sergei Aleshkov was 6 years old, just 6. He lived in a small village in the Soviet Union. When German soldiers came, they didn't spare anyone. They hanged his older brother, shot his mother with a machine gun. Sergei watched his family die, watched his world end. A neighbor pushed him away, told him to run. Sergei wandered alone in the woods for days, cold, starving, desperate. A Soviet reconnaissance unit found him, wrapped him in a horse blanket. The soldiers of the 142nd Guards Rifle Regiment adopted him. Their commander, Major Vobo, formally adopted Sergei to keep him from the orphanage. At 6 years old, Sergei had a tiny uniform, became a soldier. He delivered letters to the men, helped keep their spirits up. He even went on reconnaissance missions, helped spot German artillery positions. When the 142nd went to Stalingrad, Sergei went with them. A Luftwaffe pilot mistook him for an officer and opened fire. But Sergei survived the brutal fighting. When his adopted father was trapped under rubble, Sergei tried desperately to dig him out. He received the Combat Merit Award at 6 years old. He survived 2 more near-death experiences. A shell knocked him into a river. A jeep hit a landmine. But Sergei stayed with his unit. They were his family, his only family. In 1944, at 8 years old, he was ordered to leave the war. He was sent to military school. A gift from Soviet General Chuikov, a Browning pistol. Reason 12. Hitler Youth Soldiers, fanatical child defenders of the Reich. The Hitler Youth was an organization that indoctrinated young Germans. Boys joined at age 10, were trained in military skills and Nazi ideology. As the war progressed, Hitler Youth members became actual soldiers. In the final battles for Berlin, thousands of Hitler Youth fought. Some were only 14. Some were even younger. These children had been raised on Nazi propaganda their entire lives. They believed they were defending the Reich, defending German civilization. They fought with fanatical devotion, fought knowing they would lose. Some committed suicide rather than surrender. Others fought to the death against Soviet forces. The Hitler Youth represented the ultimate tragedy of child soldiers. Children who had been indoctrinated, turned into fanatics, sent to die for a regime. Reason 11. Soviet child partisan. Guerrilla fighters in occupied territories. Behind German lines in occupied Soviet territory, partisan units fought. These units included children, some as young as 10. They fought in the forests, sabotaged German supply lines, ambushed German patrols, gathered intelligence. These children were orphans, their families killed by the Nazis. They had nowhere to go, no one to care for them. The partisans gave them a purpose, a family, a chance to fight back. Soviet children fought with extraordinary determination. Some killed dozens of Germans. Some died in combat. They were among the youngest combatants of the war. Reason 10. Jewish child resistance fighters, fighting back against the Holocaust. In the ghettos and concentration camps, children fought back. Some were only teenagers. Some were even younger. They sabotaged Nazi operations from within the camps. They smuggled weapons. They gathered intelligence. Some escaped and joined partisan units. The child resistance fighters faced impossible odds. They knew they were probably going to die, but they fought anyway, fought for dignity, fought for revenge. Child resistance fighters showed extraordinary courage, showed that even in the darkest places, resistance was possible. Reason 9. Polish child soldiers, fighting for independence. Poland was invaded from both east and west. Polish children joined the resistance, joined the underground armies. Some were only teenagers, some younger. They fought for Polish independence, fought against both Nazis and Soviets. Polish child soldiers demonstrated remarkable bravery. They sabotaged German operations, gathered intelligence. Many were captured and executed. Polish children became part of their nation's fight for freedom. Reason 8. Chinese child soldiers, fighting Japan's invasion. China was invaded by Japan in the 1930s. The war dragged on for years. Children joined the fight. Some were orphans. Some had lost their families to Japanese atrocities. Chinese child soldiers fought in the resistance. They fought with weapons. Some fought with bamboo spears. They fought knowing they were outgunned, knowing they would lose battles, but they fought anyway, fought for their homeland. Chinese children paid a terrible price in the war with Japan. Reason 7. Japanese child pilots, kamikaze child soldiers. As Japan's situation became desperate, they used child pilots. Some were only 17, some even younger. They were trained as kamikaze pilots, suicide pilots. They flew planes loaded with explosives directly into American ships. They knew they would die. It was guaranteed. But they flew anyway. Flew because they had been trained to, because they had been indoctrinated with Japanese militarism and Bushido. Japanese child kamikaze pilots represented the ultimate tragedy of war. Children sent to certain death. Children used as weapons. Reason 6. French child resistance. Fighting the occupation from within. France was occupied by Nazi Germany. French children joined the resistance. Some were only 10 or 11 years old. They smuggled weapons. They carried messages. They gathered intelligence. They helped hide Jewish refugees. French child resistance fighters faced execution if caught, but they continued anyway, continued to resist. Some were caught and killed. French children showed that age was no barrier to resistance. Reason 5. Norwegian child soldiers, fighting the occupation. Norway was occupied by Nazi Germany. Norwegian children joined the fight. Some were only teenagers, some younger. They sabotaged German military installations. They helped resistance fighters escape. They gathered intelligence on German operations. Norwegian children risked their lives for their country. Many were caught and imprisoned. Some were executed. Norwegian children showed extraordinary courage in fighting the occupation. Reason 4. Greek child soldiers, partisans in the mountains. Greece was occupied by Nazi Germany and Italy. Greek children joined partisan units in the mountains. They fought guerrilla warfare against occupiers. Some were only teenagers, some younger. They ambushed German convoys, sabotaged military operations. Greek child soldiers fought, knowing they were probably going to die. But they fought anyway, fought for Greek independence. Reason 3. Belgian child resistance, children fighting back. Belgium was occupied by Nazi Germany. Belgian children joined the resistance. Some were only teenagers, some younger. They smuggled weapons. They helped people escape. They gathered intelligence on German operations. Belgian child resistance fighters risked their lives daily. Some were caught and tortured. Some were executed. Belgian children showed that childhood ended when occupation began. Reason 2. Yugoslav partisan child soldiers, fighting in the Balkan resistance. Yugoslavia was torn apart during World War II. Yugoslav partisans fought against Nazi occupation. Children joined these partisan units. Some were only teenagers, some younger. They fought in brutal mountain warfare. They fought knowing they were probably going to be killed, but they fought anyway. Fought for Yugoslav independence. Yugoslav child partisans paid a terrible price in the war. Reason 1. The lost generation. The psychological cost of child soldiers. Perhaps the most important story about WWII's child combatants is the psychological cost. These children witnessed horrors no child should witness. They killed people, watched their friends die. They were traumatized. Many suffered PTSD their entire lives. Some could never fully recover from their experiences. Some took their own lives as adults, unable to cope with the memories. The true cost of using child soldiers wasn't measured just in battles. It was measured in the shattered lives, the broken minds, the children who grew into adults carrying unbearable trauma. The lost generation, a generation that had to grow up too fast.